Salamta. What you're about to see is one of the most stunning videos ever recorded. It was taken on November 23, 1996 on Galawa Beach, a secluded stretch of sand on the northern coast of Ngazidja, the largest island of the Comoros Archipelago. The recording itself was taken by an unsuspecting tourist as she lounged on the beach. Suddenly, a passenger plane emerged into view from her left. With the camera rolling, she captured this video.
What's it? What's this? Oh, Malifi. What is this? Oh, shit.
This was the outcome of a hijacking gone wrong. This video has been shared around a lot in its time, both on television and in the age of the internet, but I don't think we really appreciate just how shocking this video actually is. It's not very often that you happen to capture on video a plane crashing on water, let alone a wide-body passenger plane. It's something that just does not happen. But we are not here to talk about this video in and of itself. We are here to talk about the subject, the plane itself. How did it end up this way? Who hijacked the plane and why? What actually is the story of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961? Ethiopia is an African country that, famously, was never once part of a European colony. However, this is a nation with its own complex history behind it, dating back thousands of years. Throughout the 20th century, it had been engaged in conflict, whether it be from outside forces or from civil internal conflict. By the time the 1970s rolled around, Ethiopia descended into chaos. A power struggle had ousted the emperor's regime. Military factions with opposing ideologies and a brutal civil war with what is today the country of Eritrea had torn the country apart. Ethiopia was left in a state of seemingly endless conflict, corruption, and famine, on a scale that was unprecedented. The country was spearheaded by this guy, Mengistu Haile Mariam, whose government and policies exacerbated a drought. Crop failure pushed millions to the brink of starvation, which came to a head in 1984. That year, the BBC shared a report on the Ethiopian famine that stunned the world. The now infamous report was the work of BBC reporter Michael Burke and Kenyan photojournalist Mohammed Amin. A legend in the profession, Amin was an award-winning journalist with a fearless reputation. He always had a camera with him and delved into the toughest of regions, including active war zones. As it turned out, Mohammed Amin would also be just one of 163 passengers on board Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. By the 1990s, a new Ethiopia was emerging to the world, as an era of military rule was brought to an end and a new republic was born. But tensions remained, and political instability had meant that hijackings in Ethiopia were uncomfortably frequent, and Ethiopian Airlines has been a target before. All of this is important to our story today, as it contextualizes the sort of environment that the Ethiopian Airlines hijackers called their reality. This was their country. They had been persecuted, imprisoned, and with nothing left to lose, they sought to escape it. Alamehu Bekele Beleni, Matthias Solomon Belay, and Sultan Ali Hussein were three educated, mid-20s Ethiopian men. These were the names of the three hijackers read out on Ethiopian state radio after this incident. They devised a simple plan. They would hijack a passenger plane, force it to fly elsewhere, or die trying. Ethiopian Airlines was, and still is, one of the most reputable airlines in all of Africa. The Ethiopian flag carrier had gone through many changes itself, just like its home nation. In the 1980s, the airline had taken delivery of a brand new aircraft, 3 Boeing 767-200s, a popular wide-body twinjet that was an ideal solution for Ethiopian Airlines' transcontinental services. The last of these planes to be delivered was Echo Tango Alpha India Zulu. Pilots often abbreviated this to just Zulu. Flight 961 was the route leaving Addis Ababa going to Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. However, as is typical with many Ethiopian Airlines services, the flight makes multiple stops, the first of which was to Nairobi, Kenya, then Brazzaville, Congo, and Lagos, Nigeria. It was a long journey. Flight 961 departed in the late morning and took all day to get there. On the morning of November 23, 1996, 163 passengers turned up for Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. Sat in first class in row 2 was Mohammed Amin, our Kenyan journalist who, as we previously noted, had done plenty of work in Ethiopia and was a frequent Ethiopian Airlines customer. His media publishing company, Camerapics, were responsible for publishing the Ethiopian Airlines in-flight magazine, Salamta. Ethiopian Airlines proudly publish extensive information about their route network and destinations in their magazine. Salamta, like many in-flight magazines, included a breakdown of the Ethiopian Airlines fleet, displaying aircraft specifications. Sitting in first class on this occasion, Amin was traveling home to Nairobi and was flying with a work partner, Brian Tetley, who was sat in row 10. The three hijackers, when they booked their tickets, did so strategically. The Boeing 767 is a wide-body airliner that has 2 aisles, with a 232 7-abreast configuration in economy class. All of them, according to the official passenger manifest issued to the investigation from Ethiopian Airlines, were booked into aisle seats on the left. Alamehu Bakali Baleni was sitting in 32C. Matthias Solomon Belay was sitting 1 row ahead in seat 31B. The third hijacker, Sultan Ali Hussein, was seated seemingly further ahead in 25B, but also an aisle seat on the left side. Of course, no one else on the plane knew the intentions of these 3 men. Up on the flight deck, Flight 961 was under the command of Captain Leo Labate. At the age of 42, he's a highly experienced captain at Ethiopian Airlines with over 11,000 hours to his name at the time, and he knew the Boeing 767 extremely well. That day was supposed to be a rather special day as it was his daughter's birthday. He was joined by his younger first officer, 34-year-old Jonas Mercuria. A respected and reputable pilot in his own right, he too had extensive knowledge of the 767 with 6,500 hours logged. Flight 961 was delayed in its departure from Addis Ababa that morning. When the scheduled departure time came and went, not all passengers were on board. They halted the flight for about 25 minutes to wait for connecting passengers from another flight. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 eventually took to the skies at 11:10 in the late morning, making a course south to Kenya. As the plane climbed, everything was routine. Controllers cleared the captain to take his 767 up to 39,000 feet, their cruising altitude. Passengers were settling in. The seatbelt sign was switched off, some stretched their feet, whilst others may have been reading the November 1996 edition of Salamta. At least one of the hijackers was certainly doing that. Flight 961 was well on its way to its first stop in Nairobi, having leveled off at cruise altitude. The time was 11:30. Flight attendants were preparing their cabin service when the 2 hijackers at the very back of the plane stood up from their seats and ran forward. The third followed behind. One flight attendant later revealed to investigators that, as they were storming the flight deck, one shouted, "Everyone be seated. I have a bomb." The hijacking had officially begun. Moments later, the flight deck door is opened and they get inside. The first officer is immediately assaulted by the hijackers before he was forcefully removed from the flight deck. They assert to the captain that there are 11 hijackers taking over the flight, a clear lie meant to intimidate the captain, as there were indeed only 3 of them. He wasn't aware of that at the time. The Boeing 767 flight deck conceals a fire axe, supposed to be used in an emergency should the pilots need to escape. The axe was easily accessed. something that investigators would later notice. The hijackers removed the fire axe along with a fire extinguisher from their compartments to brandish as weapons, in addition to the supposed bomb they had constructed. It later became apparent to investigators and is widely believed that no such explosive device actually existed. Captain Leol Abate in the moment, however, had no idea. Having asserted themselves, taking over the flight, they make a demand to the captain, still seated in the left seat. They demand that he redirect the flight from Kenya to Australia. This aircraft, the Boeing 767-200, does have a long range. More specifically, this was the 767-200ER extended range. It can fly, on a full tank, over 5,000 nautical miles. If we throw that data over Addis Ababa, we can see that that range would bring the plane to the western shores of Australia. It could make it to Perth. However, Flight 961 was not carrying nearly the amount of fuel that would be necessary to make such a flight. As per the legal requirements, Flight 961 was loaded with the fuel it needed to fly from Addis to Nairobi, plus the fuel for the alternate, plus contingency fuel. In total, this amounted to around 4 hours worth of fuel. They only loaded what they needed. It would have made for a lighter plane, thus increasing efficiency. When this was pointed out to the hijackers, they weren't convinced. You see, they had learned of the 767's range specifications from Salamta, the in-flight magazine. We even have a copy right here. Turning to the fleet page, and sure enough, there it is. 5,166 nautical miles, or 11 hours flying time. Captain Leol showed them the discrepancy between what the 767 can hold and what was displayed in the fuel indication on the overhead panel. As was to be expected, the plane only displayed the fuel for the journey plus the required extra, but not enough to fulfill the hijackers' demands. The captain made an attempt to negotiate a compromise with the hijackers and suggested a refueling stop, before then completing the journey over to Australia. The hijackers were insistent on their demands, despite the clear certainty of fuel starvation should they go through with the trans-Indian Oceanic crossing. The captain was put in an incredibly difficult situation. He can't risk the safety of the passengers. The hijackers threatened to bomb the plane if he didn't comply with their demand. Outside the flight deck, the flight attendants stationed in the front were instructed by the other hijackers to allow them to speak over the PA. They announced to the passengers in English, French, and Amharic that Flight 961 was hijacked. By this point, the first officer had been ejected from the flight deck and was now sitting in first class. Two of the hijackers had now firmly positioned themselves outside the flight deck, with one still sitting inside in the right seat with the captain. The captain would now need to contact air traffic control, as they'd now be taken off of their pre-filed flight plan to Nairobi. First, the captain contacted Addis Ababa Area Control to announce the hijacking at around 11:30, at which point Addis got on the phone with Nairobi to inform them to expect the hijacked aircraft. According to the events in the final report, it was assumed that Flight 961 would be landing in Mombasa on the Kenya coastline. The cockpit voice recorder only recorded around 30 minutes of the event towards the end of the flight, but we know from the captain's account that the topic of diversion came up, with Mombasa being identified as a suitable refueling stop. Again, the hijackers rejected this. It wouldn't be for around another 20 minutes until Flight 961 appeared on radar screens in Kenya. At 11:57, they made their first call to Nairobi and did so with an interesting request. As you know, the hijackers' intentions were to divert the flight to Australia. On the plane, they made a request to call and talk with someone in Australia directly from a telephone, which on the Boeing 767 did not exist. So, what the hijackers did was they picked up their copy of Salamta once again, which contained a page filled with telephone numbers for Ethiopian Airlines international sales agents. In Australia, there were a total of 4 offices. The hijackers then requested, at the threat of assault to the captain, to pass these contact numbers over to air traffic control, who would then relay whatever message they wanted. Nairobi Area Control did make note of these telephone numbers, but it's unclear if they ever did, pick up the phone to call the Ethiopian Airlines sales agents in Australia. There was, however, a back and forth communication between Flight 961, the hijackers, and Nairobi, just re-highlighting that the plane simply does not have enough fuel to reach Australia. But to quote the captain on frequency, they refuse to land anywhere other than Australia, so we have no choice. Except when we finish our fuel, we will land on water. The hijackers were unwilling to negotiate. Air traffic control could only, at this point, just recommend landing in Mombasa. 2 other suitable airports were also within reach, Zanzibar and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. With the threat of death looming over him, the captain manipulated the 767's autopilot by changing the heading to fly along the African coastline. The idea to make it seem as if the plane was heading out over the ocean as the hijackers requested, but in close proximity to land and, by extension, an airport. They soon enough caught onto this and demanded that the captain fly east, out over the open sea. Now the captain had been forced into a dangerous predicament. Whereas before he could navigate the plane to safety should the hijackers have a change of heart, turning out over the ocean would mean a certain crash at sea. There was, however, one hope left. Nestled between the African continent and the large island nation of Madagascar, the small archipelago nation of Comoros exists. Its capital, Moroni, has an international airport. Captain Leo thought it to be possible to land there if he could. He changed course for Comoros, still cruising at 39,000 feet. 2:25. It has now been nearly 3 hours since the hijacking began. They have been unrelenting in their ambitions to attempt to fly to Australia. The head hijacker was still sitting in the right seat. According to the captain's account in the final report, he was fiddling with the flight controls, including the rudder pedals, and even selected the reverse thrust seemingly at random, all whilst drinking whiskey acquired from the duty-free straight from the bottle. It was a clear day, and the captain gained a view of Comoros and even had the airport in sight. Not wanting to take the plane any further, he entered a holding pattern around 20 miles west of the island. It was this decision from the captain to not continue further and remain holding here. This ultimately saved lives. It was then that the first indication of low fuel was indicated on the Engine Indication Crew Alerting System, ICAS. It was obviously an inevitable warning, but it certainly unsettled the captain as he pleaded with the hijackers to let them land. Still, they refused. It was around this time that the cockpit voice recording began recording from the flight deck microphones. The recording captured the captain attempting to negotiate with the head hijacker. The transcript notes the warning tones from the aircraft systems. The Boeing 767 was trying to tell them she was running out of fuel. 2:41. The right engine flamed out from fuel starvation. The sound of the engine winding down echoed throughout the plane, audible to the passengers, crew, and hijackers. Without the necessary thrust to maintain such a high altitude, the plane naturally began to drop. The change in altitude being something that was noticed by the hijacker. He complained the altitude had decreased. The captain had to remind him that without both engines, the plane would drop regardless. It was out of his control. This hijacker, for the first time, left the right seat, exited the flight deck to the cabin to talk with the other hijackers. For the first time since the ordeal began, Captain Leo Abate was alone on the flight deck. With this opportunity, he swiftly activated the public address system, linked it to his microphone, and spoke the following words. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. We have run out of fuel and we are losing one engine at this time, and we are expecting a crash landing, and that is all I have to say. We have lost already one engine, and I ask all passengers to react to the hijackers." The captain's words here, "react to the hijackers," have been interpreted as a call to action to encourage the passengers to confront the hijackers themselves. In doing so, the captain could, in theory, land the plane whilst he still had the left engine and considerable altitude at his disposal. The captain was not the only one on board who shared this thought. In the cabin, there was one passenger who was making moves. According to accounts from survivors, journalist Mohammed Amin got up from his seat in first class and moved aft. One passenger sitting in economy class was Michael Odenyo. He would later go on to give several accounts over the years to the media regarding the events in the passenger cabin. Speaking to Al Jazeera, he mentioned how Mohammed Amin came to the economy class and suggested fighting the hijackers directly. After all, they had the hijackers far outnumbered. According to Odenyo's account, there was little interest from the passengers regarding Amin's idea. Such an intervention from the passengers did not occur. This didn't stop Mo Amin from confronting the hijackers himself. In the final stages of the flight, he was purported to have been in the forward cabin negotiating with the hijackers outside of the flight deck. According to family members, they believed Mohammed Amin would have been thinking about the story of a lifetime that he could get out of this should he survive. For nearly 34 minutes towards the end of the flight, the cockpit voice recorder captured the dialogue in the flight deck. Most of the conversations on the transcript pertained to a back and forth between the captain and the leader of the hijackers about death and crashing the plane at sea. The hijacker was posturing about courage whilst threatening to take the captain's life. It's all very bizarre and spoken like someone who had nothing to lose. The captain, being an absolute Chad, did not let the hijacker's rhetoric get to him. He maintained a sense of self and belonging in his position as the captain of the plane. On multiple occasions, he asked to speak again with the passengers, believing they had a right to know what was about to happen. He said it straight to them that he had already considered himself a dead man, and that there wasn't anything they could do to change the situation now. He was disarming the hijackers of the ability to break his will. As the situation continued to spiral more out of control, the hijacker in the flight deck made heavy, erratic movements on the control wheel. For a time, the plane exhibited erratic behavior induced by the inputs of this individual. He disconnected the autopilot. The captain stepped in, regaining control of his plane with his control wheel. The plane made a large right turn, heading north. 2:56. The hijackers have conceded nothing. Following the coastline of Comoros to the west, the second number 1 left engine flamed out. The captain was mid-sentence when the cockpit voice recording ceased. Panic began to descend throughout the plane. The sound of the second engine spooling down was the prompt for passengers to retrieve the life vest from under their seat. For a moment, I want you to think about the times that you have traveled on a plane. Before takeoff, you are given the safety demo from the flight attendants, which includes instructions on how to use the life vest. The flight attendants will always say at some point, "Do not inflate your life vest until you are outside the aircraft." This is a very important step in evacuating an aircraft at sea, and you're about to find out why. Many passengers did not heed this advice and inflated theirs anyway. The first officer, who, if you recall, was forced out from the flight deck. He made his way to economy class to find passengers had already donned and even inflated their life vests. First Officer Jonas Mercuria stepped in to help deflate the life vests of those passengers. Okay, so let's talk real quick about why you shouldn't do this. Why is it not a good idea to inflate your life vest before exiting the aircraft? One reason is that it can inhibit movement. These things, when inflated, are quite bulky, which is something that unsuspecting passengers might not expect. However, in this context, in the case of Flight 961, the main reason is that these things can trap you. This is a flotation device. It floats. If the cabin is torn apart during ditching and rapidly fills with water, the inflated vest can easily force you into a crevice of air or keep you trapped in the ceiling of the cabin. This is why you inflate once you know you are outside the aircraft, so you float on the surface of the water and not have yourself be trapped inside a sinking airplane fuselage, meaning you drown. You're dead. You're not just dead. You're fucking dead. In that scenario, no one's coming for you. No one's going to save you. You are completely, categorically, without question, well beyond any logical debate, totally, utterly fucked. So, don't do it. Both engines have now flamed out due to fuel starvation. The plane has been in the air for so long, it has exhausted all the fuel in the tanks. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 is now gliding toward its fate. Without the engines, the plane's power is cut. A small auxiliary propeller called a ram air turbine deployed from beneath the fuselage. It's only a small propeller that spins, exploiting the natural airflow the plane has whilst gliding through the air. The purpose of this propeller is to generate and power the primary hydraulic system to give the pilots basic flight controls and basic electrical power for flight deck instruments. As a result of the engine failures, the flight controls become sluggish, difficult to move by the hands of the captain alone. Exhausting what altitude the plane had left, it heads north, loops again, and heads south straight for the island itself. The captain was fighting for control of the plane against the hijackers. He lost sight of the one airport on Comoros and was now forced to ditch on the water. The first officer forced his way back through the front of the cabin. He re-entered the flight deck for the first time in literally hours, pleading with the hijacker sitting in the right seat to allow him to assist the captain. Up till that point, the hijacker was working against the captain, making the already difficult to control plane even harder to control. However, he does vacate the seat, allowing the two pilots to be reunited on the flight deck, although by this point it was too late to prevent a crash. Flight 961 was just moments from hitting the water. I would like for us now to turn our attention to the island itself. Located on the northern coast of Ngazidja at the time was the Galawa Beach holiday resort. The hotel and beach became the getaway for Dolph and Marinda House from South Africa, who had recently gotten married. On that day, that afternoon, they were relaxing on the Galawa Beach, completely unaware that just a few miles away, the events of one of the most notable airplane hijackings in history was about to end. Marinda House had picked up her 1990s home video camcorder to capture memories of their trip. At around 3:20 in the afternoon, she began rolling, but moments later, she was startled by something that emerged from her left. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was just 100 feet above the water. We should take a closer look at how this crash actually unfolded and see what we can learn. In the final moments before the crash, the left wing dropped. We can see that clearly in the video. The pilots were trying to turn the plane in an attempt to try and position the aircraft parallel with the waves. Because of this, the left wing brushed against the water's surface. From that instant, the aerodynamic forces on the entire aircraft changed because a significant region of drag had suddenly been created centered on the left wing that would pull against the aircraft's forward momentum. The plane was pulled to the left as its belly impacted the water. We can see here that the fuselage was still intact, but in just a matter of seconds, the turning forces would shred it apart. The whole thing just rolled over itself. This, right here, that is the right wing. It had snapped from the fuselage, which had continued along the water. The fuselage itself by this point was in pieces. Some passengers had been ejected from the plane, others were not. Those still inside the fragments of the aircraft, if they had inflated their life vests, would have found increased difficulty in trying to escape. Yes, this crash landing on the water was devastating, but it was survivable with different variables to factor in. First responders quickly sprang into action. Tourists and locals set out on small boats to reach the site. Some survivors were pulled from the water, but many lifeless bodies were brought ashore, and 25 souls on board perished. Among them were all three of the hijackers. Legendary cameraman and journalist Mohammed Amin was also killed in the crash. As it was believed that he was standing at the front of the cabin during the crash, he never stood a chance against the impact. The footage that was captured by Marinda House that day is nothing short of stunning. Very few videos really compare. It is the only footage to ever exist to show a wide-body passenger plane ditching on water. Because of this, really, this video has been shared and broadcast many times. Frustratingly, as I discovered whilst researching this video, overwhelmingly most sources do not give credit to the person who actually shot it, Marinda House. This is her, by the way, seen here giving an interview after the incident. Because of her quick thinking, she helped document how this disaster unfolded, and how people responded in the immediate aftermath. Much was learnt from her recording. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was the deadliest pre-9/11 aircraft hijacking. There were questions around what sort of motive led to the hijackers storming the flight deck in the first place. This was something that eluded the media for some time. It was a bit of a mystery. Unlike many airliner hijackings throughout aviation history, there wasn't much of a political motive. The men weren't associated to any terrorist organization or political or religious group. All three men were educated, one was even a nurse. The others were unemployed. Speaking to the Washington Post, surviving passenger Kenedza Abueo recalled one of the hijackers saying they were prisoners. They were armed with a grenade and would blow up the plane should the passengers have intervened. This may help explain why Mohammed Amin failed to garner the support of his fellow passengers to take on the hijackers. The grenade, or bomb in this case, was later determined to just be concealed alcohol. No evidence of any explosive device was found in the waters of Comoros. So to summarize the hijackers, they were three disenfranchised men on the run with nothing to lose. Many reports state that the hijackers' intentions were to seek asylum in Australia. They gambled on the shot of a life elsewhere and lost. Poring over the details surrounding Flight 961, I feel many parallels can be drawn between this incident and that of the Hijacking family. We already have a video on this case, but to recap, in 1988, Aeroflot Flight 3739 was hijacked by a family of musicians, a mother and 10 children, who were as young as 9 by the way. They hijacked an airliner as a method of escaping the Soviet Union. Much like Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, the Hijacking employed the age-old tactic of taking control of the plane, forcing it to fly elsewhere, or die trying. The Hijacking made it as far as the Finnish border, were duped into landing at a Russian airbase, which resulted in a shootout and the deaths of multiple innocent people. The hijackers committed suicide, but not before blowing up the plane by use of the bombs they had concealed inside of a double base. If you would like to learn more about that truly baffling case, consider watching our video on it. For Captain Leol Abate, he was not unfamiliar with this sort of hijacking. Flight 961 was not actually his first hijacking experience. I know we're 35 minutes into this video and I'm aware I'm only mentioning this now, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least bring it up. Twice before had Captain Leol been hijacked. In all three cases, including Flight 961, he had been requested by the perpetrators to fly elsewhere, namely Canada and Sweden, and then Australia. In his 1992 and 1995 instance, there were no fatalities, they ended peacefully. In Flight 961, Captain Abate applied his experience in this rather unique area. The problem here ultimately being that they forced him to fly out over the ocean until fuel was exhausted. An obvious breach of security was made apparent in Flight 961. Investigators and aviation experts began to wonder just how easy was it to storm the flight deck of a passenger plane. The hijackers here easily overpowered the crew to get into the flight deck. Airliner hijackings have occurred for decades, and though airport security had evolved in preceding years, relatively little was done on board aircraft themselves. Even Ethiopian investigators, in their final report, only issued one recommendation to improve flight deck security, and that was to store the fire axe so it would only be accessible to crew members. By the 1990s, hijackings were on the decline. It was a tactic that had fallen out of favor with terrorists, and airport security and screenings had done their job in protecting passengers and crews. Perhaps there was no perceived need to improve security on board planes beyond what had already been established. Well, that perception changed 5 years later. 9/11 changed everything. The aviation industry descended into chaos, and major security improvements were made to most commercial aircraft in the sky. Reinforced flight deck doors became common. It was now standard procedure to keep these doors locked. They are now extremely strong, and they are, for lack of a better word, impenetrable to unlawful interference. Additional screening measures and stricter rules on what can be brought on board were also implemented. The effects that 9/11 had on air travel are still felt to this day. For better or worse, as air travelers, these new measures have just become a normal part of our airplane journeys. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it to be interesting, be sure to drop a like and smash that subscribe button. Because we are not done for the year just yet, we have one more video in store for the year of 2023. The next video, well, that certainly is a project. I'm not going to say what it is just yet, but know that I have waited all year to make this video. I'll be revealing all in the next episode. If you would like to be the first to know a bit more about it, you can always follow me on my socials. I have a Twitter and Blue Sky, both of which are linked in the pinned comment below. Anyway, I have got to take a moment here to thank my ever-amazing patrons over on Patreon for their continued support to the channel. This video certainly wouldn't be the same without their contributions. I spent the entire Patreon budget for this month and then some getting the license to show you the Marinda house footage. Licensing that video cost over $1,000 with taxes. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't want to just rip footage from YouTube or other documentaries. I want to be a bit more profesh than that. So combined with the other strange expenses like the in-flight magazines, blue screen, life vest, and VHS tape, which were negligible by comparison, this was the most expensive disaster breakdown episode to date. So big thanks are in order to my patrons. A shout out to Katrina Helena and Mashina, I hope I said that right. A thank you to those guys who pledged at the mid-tier these last couple weeks. Big shout out to Bella with D Boobs, who pledged at the highest tier. What a legend. Thank you so very much. If you yourself would like to support the channel further, you can join the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from just £1 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. All patrons get early access to all new videos 2 days before they are made public. That is all from me today. I'm going to sign off the video now. Have a great day. If you are American, happy Thanksgiving, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!